You probably think the doctrines of major world religions were simply polished and clarified over time.
Right, like just a natural, peaceful evolution of thought.
Exactly. Like ancient believers just slowly figured out the finer details of their faith. But what if the original founders of these faiths, I mean, the prophets, the apostles, the early believers, what if they wouldn't even be able to understand the way modern theology is debated today?
Yeah, and not because they would disagree with the answers, but because they literally wouldn't recognize the questions being asked.
Right. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking you on a journey through this massive hidden intellectual earthquake that fundamentally rewired how Judaism, Christianity, and Islam think about God.
Yeah, we're looking at a deeply fascinating scholarly dissertation proposal titled After Bar Kokhba. And the core mission of our deep dive today is to unpack a really provocative argument
Which is?
that the biggest shift in Western theology wasn't driven by a specific holy text. And it wasn't driven by some famous council of bishops or, a sudden divine revelation. It was actually driven by a catastrophic, bloody historical event in the 2nd century that forced humanity to completely change the very language it used to talk about the divine.
It's just a completely wild premise. I mean, when I was reading through this source, I kept trying to visualize what this kind of shift actually looks like.
Yeah, it's hard to conceptualize.
Right. So I guess the best way I can think about it is imagine you have an old family recipe, say your grandmother's bread recipe.
Okay, I'm with you.
It's entirely about action, right? Like it's just a list of verbs. You mix the flour, you knead the dough, you bake it.
It's practical.
Exactly. It's practical. It's something you actively do.
It's a lived process. You know the bread by baking the bread.
Yes. But then imagine if someone took that recipe and instead of telling you how to bake it, they translate it into a rigorous chemical formula.
Oh, wow.
Right. They hand you a 10-page breakdown of the molecular structure of gluten and the thermodynamic properties of yeast. Technically, they are describing the exact same loaf of bread, but the language is completely alien.
Totally alien.
You've moved from the realm of doing something to analyzing the invisible, microscopic essence of a thing.
Which is actually the perfect way to frame the before and after of ancient theology that this source explores.
Okay.
Because the author argues that before this major historical rupture, the ancient biblical world operated on what is called a Hebrew functional relational ontology.
Okay, let's pause there because I have to admit, when I hit the phrase functional relational ontology in the text, my eyes completely glazed over.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, ontology is just one of those heavy philosophical words that always trips me up.
Well, it sounds intimidating, sure, but ontology is really just the philosophical study of being.
Like what it means to exist.
Exactly. It's how we define what it means for something to exist. And the dissertation points out that ancient biblical thought didn't care at all about the mechanics of existence.
Right.
They didn't sit around debating the metaphysical makeup of the universe or, what substance God was made of. In the ancient Hebrew mindset, identity was purely about action. It was about covenantal performance. God is defined entirely by what he does.
Yeah, and the text gives a great example of this. It points out that in the early texts, God isn't described as the omnipresent ground of all being or some invisible force.
No, not
God is the one who brings you out of Egypt. It's a track record. It's an action.
Right. Look at the famous story in Exodus 3.14. Moses asks for God's name, and the traditional English translation we usually hear is, I am that I am.
Which sounds very mystical and static.
It does. But the author highlights that the original Hebrew grammar there actually implies a future-acted identity.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a better translation is, I will be who I will be. Meaning, my identity isn't some static philosophical concept you can study. My identity is going to be revealed to you through the actions I'm about to take in history to deliver you.
Wow.
Identity is covenantal reliability. Action doesn't follow being. Being is made real through action.
So if I'm trying to map this onto everyday life, is the Hebrew mindset basically like defining someone strictly as a builder because you watch them build houses every day?
Exactly.
Like they are a builder because they're holding a hammer, sweating, and putting up walls. The action is the only proof you need.
The action is the reality. There is no hidden builder essence separate from the act of building.
Okay, which means the alternative mindset, the one that source says eventually takes over, would refuse to call that person a builder. until they've, I don't know, sat down and analyzed the metaphysical molecular essence of builderness inside the person's soul.
Yes, exactly.
Even if the guy is literally standing there holding a hammer.
That is the fundamental difference.
Yeah.
And that alternative system you just described is Greek and Indo-European metaphysics.
Got it.
Because the Greek philosophical system obsessed over substance, nature, and essence. In that system, identity precedes action.
You have to know what it is before what it does.
Right, you have to define the abstract, what a thing is, before you can ever talk about what it does. So for the Greek thinker, the ultimate question is always, what is God's essence?
Okay, wait, I need to push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
When I think of the Greeks, I think of Greek mythology.
Yeah.
Zeus throwing lightning bolts, Poseidon causing earthquakes, gods turning into animals.
Right, the myths.
Yeah, those are all massive, crazy actions. How is the Greek system not action-based?
That's actually a really crucial distinction to make. You're talking about Homeric myth, the stories of the gods. But the source isn't talking about Greek mythology, it's talking about Greek philosophy.
Oh, I see.
By the time we get to thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, Greek intellectuals had largely moved past the messy, action-packed myths of Zeus. They were looking for the underlying logical structure of the universe.
So they wanted the theory.
Right. Aristotle famously talked about the unmoved mover. It's this perfect, static, unchanging essence that causes all movement, but doesn't actually do anything in a human sense.
Okay.
And that philosophical framework, this total obsession with categorizing the unchangeable essence of things, became the intellectual operating system of the entire Mediterranean world.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. But the ancient Hebrew prophets weren't asking those Aristotelian questions at all.
No, not at all.
For Jesus, the apostles, the early prophets, this Hebrew action-based grammar was the default. So the burning question is, if action-based theology was the original operating system of biblical thought, how did the entire theological world suddenly switch to this Greek essence grammar?
Well, standard history usually points to the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE.
Right.
We're taught that a bunch of bishops and theologians sat in a room and drafted the Nicene Creed, permanently defining the Trinity using Greek philosophical terms.
That's what I've always heard.
But this dissertation makes an incredibly bold claim. It says Nicaea was just a symptom. It was just the aftermath. The real hinge of history, the actual catalyst for this massive shift, was the Bar Kokhba revolt.
The Bar Kokhba revolt.
Okay.
This took place from 132 to 135 CE. It was a devastating, completely failed Jewish rebellion against the Roman Empire.
We really need to pause and grasp the sheer scale of this catastrophe, because it wasn't just a lost military campaign.
No, it was brutal.
The Bar Kokhba revolt resulted in the near-total destruction of Jerusalem. It meant the permanent loss of the temple, the end of the priesthood, the loss of the physical land, and the total eradication of any political sovereignty.
Wow.
And the author argues that this loss didn't just change the geopolitical map, it triggered a total collapse of enacted theology.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because if your entire relationship with the divine is based on covenantal action, meaning you literally perform your faith by offering sacrifices at a physical temple, living in a specific promised land, and doing communal rituals, what happens when the Romans burn the stage to the ground
Exactly.
and permanently ban you from the theater? You literally cannot perform the covenant anymore.
Well,
verbs are just gone.
And when a theology can no longer be physically performed or embodied in a lived geographical structure, it is forced to adapt or die.
It had to change.
It had to become textualized. It had to be rationalized. It became abstracted. The author uses a really striking phrase here: trauma as a generator of metaphysics.
Trauma as a generator of metaphysics. Man, I love that phrasing. It almost feels like, okay, imagine a legendary theater troupe.
Okay.
They've been performing the same incredible plays for generations,
Hmm.
but one day their theater burns down to the ground, and worse, they're exiled from their city.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. So they can never actually perform their plays ever again.
Yeah.
Eventually, just to keep the memory of the plays alive, they end up sitting around in a classroom endlessly debating the philosophical concept of acting rather than actually getting on a stage.
Yeah. It's a tragic migration. What's fascinating here is that standard religious histories usually frame this shift toward philosophy as a natural maturation of thought.
Right, like they got smarter.
Exactly. They write it as if these religions were just growing up reading Plato and getting more intellectually sophisticated. But this source argues it was a forced survival mechanism.
Oh.
When the theology couldn't be lived in the dirt, the blood, and the stone of the temple, it had to be theorized in the mind. Religion migrated from narrative performance to argumentative identity.
But I'm still stuck on the how. I mean, how did a bunch of displaced, traumatized people suddenly start talking like Greek philosophers? Did they just, like, pick up a copy of Aristotle on their way out of Jerusalem?
Well, it comes down to the reality of exile. When you lose your physical homeland, you are dispersed into the broader empire, in this case, the Hellenistic Roman world.
Okay. Yeah.
And to survive, to communicate, to trade, and eventually to defend your faith to your new neighbors, you have to speak their language.
Which was Greek.
And I don't just mean Greek as a spoken language. I
Yeah.
mean the intellectual lingua franca of the empire, which was Greek philosophy.
Oh, I see.
If you wanted Roman intellectuals to take your God seriously, you couldn't just say, he's the God who brought us out of Egypt. They would demand to know, yes, but what is his metaphysical substance?
Wow, they were forced into it.
You were forced into the Hellenistic marketplace of ideas, and you had to play by their philosophical rules just to survive.
And this wasn't just an isolated incident for one small group of people. This trauma created a ripple effect that swallowed up the entire Western religious world. Which brings us to a section of the source called The Great Convergence.
Yes. The author meticulously traces how Christianity, Judaism, and later Islam, three traditions we usually think of as fierce historical rivals, all went through this exact same metaphysical drift.
They all adopted the same philosophical playbook.
Exactly.
Let's unpack Christianity first. So the early apostles, operating in that Hebrew mindset, proclaimed things like kingship, salvation, resurrection.
Right. Action terms.
Yeah, these are all action terms.
Yeah.
Saying Jesus is Lord was a title of authority in action, like saying someone is the king.
But post-135 CE, as Christianity permanently separates from its Jewish roots and the physical center of Jerusalem is gone, the nature of the debates completely changes.
Okay.
Christians start arguing over Greek concepts like ousia, which means essence, or hypostasis, the underlying substance. They debate eternal generation.
Okay, so translate ousia for me in this context. Why do they care so much about this specific word?
Because they were trying to figure out if Jesus was made of the exact same invisible stuff as God the Father.
Oh, okay.
Was his essence identical to the Father's essence, or just similar? That obsession with categorizing the stuff of the divine is a purely Greek fixation.
Right.
The focus shifted entirely from the historical actions of Jesus to the metaphysical internal mechanics of the Trinity.
And the dissertation points out that Judaism underwent a parallel transformation. With the physical temple gone, rabbinic halakha Jewish law replaced the physical geographic world of the temple with intense legal abstraction.
Yes, and centuries later, you get medieval Jewish thinkers like Maimonides. Maimonides is a fantastic example of this convergence. He was a brilliant thinker, but he was heavily influenced by Aristotelian philosophy. He ended up defining God as the necessary being.
Okay.
And to explain God, he relied on something called negative theology.
Right, negative theology. I really struggled with this part of the source. Can you explain how that actually works in plain English?
Sure.
So instead of saying God is powerful, negative theology means I'm only allowed to say God is not weak. I mean, why would anyone choose to talk like that?
It seems counterintuitive, I know, but it's driven by strict philosophical logic. Maimonides and others believe that if God's essence is truly infinite and perfect, then any human word we use, like powerful or good, is just too limited.
It puts God in a human box.
Exactly. So the only intellectually pure way to describe God is to strip away all human attributes. You can't say what God is, only what God is not.
God is not physical. God is not ignorant. God is not weak.
Right. It's incredibly rigorous and intellectually impressive. But the author argues that it completely replaces the visceral, relational immediacy of the biblical covenant with pure, unapproachable ontology.
You lose the God who acts, and you get a philosophical absolute.
Precisely.
I can totally see how that changes the relationship a believer would have with their faith. But what really surprised me in this text was that Islam isn't immune to this either.
Not at all.
I mean, Islam started in the 7th century, hundreds of years after the Bar Kokhba revolt. And the Quran has this intense focus on functional sovereignty and narrative command. It's very direct. Do this, don't do that.
It starts out incredibly action-oriented, but as the Islamic Empire expanded rapidly into these older, Hellenized, Indo-European intellectual spaces, places like Syria and Persia Islamic scholars encountered the exact same Greek philosophical questions.
And they followed the exact same path.
The source mentions early Islamic philosophical movements like the Mu'tazila, Ash'ari theology, and this whole tradition called Kalam.
Right, kalam.
Wow. Kalam is Islamic scholastic theology. These scholars were trying to logically defend the Quranic commands against Greek philosophers. But to win the argument, they had to use the opponent's tools.
Oh, wow.
They started debating the eternal nature of God's attributes. They had to prove God's absolute unity metaphysically. And just like the Christians and the Jews, these Islamic scholars inadvertently turned God into a metaphysical absolute.
Even the mystics, right.
Yeah, the author even notes that Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam, which we usually associate with poetry and divine love, ultimately ends up metaphysically abstracting the unity of God into a concept of oneness of being.
Wait, so if I'm understanding this text correctly,
Uh-huh.
despite all the intense doctrinal differences between Christians, Jews, and Muslims today, their deepest shared unity isn't actually Abrahamic revelation. It's Indo-European metaphysics.
It's the ultimate irony. They've spent centuries fiercely arguing over who has the correct doctrine, but they are all arguing using the exact same Greek philosophical grammar.
That's incredible.
They all adopted essence ontology.
They are all intensely arguing over the chemical formula of the bread, completely forgetting that it used to just be a list of baking instructions.
Which is a perfect segue into the most important question: why does this matter today?
Right. So what does this all mean? If you're listening to this and wondering, okay, a bunch of scholars 2,000 years ago changed the way they argued about theology. Why does this change how I view religion or history or even my own culture right now?
It matters because of what the text calls the alien grammar. The author states quite bluntly that if you could somehow time travel and present these later metaphysical theologies, like Nicene Trinitarianism or medieval Jewish negative theology or Islamic Kalam, if you presented those to Moses or Jesus or the apostles,
They wouldn't just disagree with you. They wouldn't say, oh, you got the doctrine wrong.
no, they would look at you with utter confusion. They would say, these are not our questions. We don't even possess the conceptual map to understand what you are asking. This is not how Revelation defines God.
It's literally as if the underlying operating system of Western religion was quietly swapped out 1,900 years ago.
That's exactly it.
And ever since then, theologians have spent centuries trying to run old, action-based covenantal software on a completely different, abstract, metaphysical hardware. It's bound to produce errors, or at least fundamentally alter the user experience.
And that leads to a massive hermeneutical implication.
Hermeneutics being the science of how we interpret texts.
Right. The source argues that if you truly want to retrieve ancient biblical theology, you can't just keep debating modern doctrines within this inherited Greek framework. You have to actively try to recover the original Hebrew functional ontology.
Oh.
You have to recognize that these later doctrines, no matter how sacred they are to their traditions, aren't just helpful clarifications of the original text. They are translations into an alien category.
It means we have to learn to read the ancient texts differently. You have to learn to read the verbs again, instead of just searching for the hidden essences. When you read an ancient story, you have to stop asking, what is the metaphysical nature of this event? And start asking, what is the faithful action being demanded here?
It shifts the entire focus from intellectual belief to lived obedience, from knowing the essence of a thing to participating in the action of a thing.
So to quickly recap the journey we've taken today, we've explored how a profoundly lived, action-based understanding of the divine, where God and humanity were defined exclusively by what they did in history, was absolutely shattered by the historical trauma of the Bar Kokhba revolt.
Right.
The violent loss of the physical temple and the land forced Judaism, Christianity, and eventually Islam to abandon the enacted rituals of their origins. To survive in a new, hostile world, they were pushed into a shared, abstract realm of Greek philosophical metaphysics.
The physical stage burned down, so everyone became a theater critic instead of an actor.
That is perfectly said. And we are still living with the consequences of that shift today. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something that builds on this source, but pushes us into our own current reality.
Let's hear it.
If the tragic loss of physical spaces like the temple, the land, the physical center of the community forced ancient faiths to abandon enacted, lived reality in favor of abstract, theoretical metaphysics, what is going to happen to our modern belief systems, our cultures, and our identities today?
Oh, that's interesting.
Think about it. We are living in an increasingly virtual, disembodied digital age. We are losing our shared physical reality right now. We are trading physical town squares for algorithms and in-person communities for online
They
avatars.
really are.
Are we on the verge of another massive ontological shift simply because we are moving out of the physical world and into the cloud?
That is a phenomenal question. If historical trauma and the loss of physical space generated the first great metaphysical shift, it stands to reason that the virtualization of our modern world will generate the next one. When we stop interacting in the physical world, our entire framework for reality has to change.
Will we even recognize the questions our grandchildren are asking about reality and truth? Or will they be speaking a grammar that is completely alien to us? It's something to think about the next time you look at an old family recipe or, the next time you stare at your smartphone. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Afterbar Kokhba.
It's been great.
We'll catch you next time. But until then, keep asking the big questions, even if they are in an alien grammar.